Hey, it's Scott Garlis at Stansberry Research. We're here at the 2018 Alliance Conference in Las Vegas. I'm here with Grant Williams, co-founder of Real Vision.
Good to see you.
Thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
So, a couple questions I'd like to ask. The first is, what would be your single most important piece of advice for investors?
Oh boy, yeah, right now, pay attention. Don't outsource attention because there's so much happening. There are so many things that can go wrong right now, and the market's going up, which is great, but don't assume because it's going up you can just sit back and let other people take care of you. You have to be paying attention right now.
It almost feels like we're a tweet away from disaster some days.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean that goes for people following politics and Tesla shareholders, I guess, at the moment.
Yeah, it is incredible too. But just in the last 2 years, the way DC has become so much more of a dynamic in the market.
Yeah,
and we get people that write in like, why on our podcast, like, why do you talk so much about DC? Markets never cared about DC, and they're right. It never did in the past, but now.
Well, it's a huge problem now, and not it's not a problem therefore they're right. The problem is the divisiveness and the fact that people can't agree on anything, and if you don't have accord, you have discord, and that's never a great thing for markets in the long run.
Not at all. Not at all. What keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? Oh, that's another great question. I mean, well, so much. I mean, I'm permanently jet lagged because I'm always on a plane, so jet lag is the first thing. But look, again, I think there are so many things. There are so many dangers lurking under the bed that you just have to be paying attention. And it's really difficult to monitor whether it's politics or whether it's the debt or whether it's the dollar. Any of these things could trigger something. So I wouldn't say they all keep me awake at night, but I'm paying attention to a lot of things at the moment, and it's exhausting. So I fall asleep really quick and then I wake up.
I bet. I bet. So do you expect a rapid market rallying to enter this bull market run?
I think possibly, but we may have already seen it. We may have seen that rapid rise last year. I don't know. Is a simple truth. But I understand some very good friends of mine who are super smart believe in this melt up scenario.
Yep.
I just wonder when we zoom out on the chart in a couple of years' time if we haven't already seen it. I genuinely don't know. It could go either way, and again, you have to be prepared to be wrong because it could catch a lot of people by surprise.
Interesting. And then, why do you think most investors have been on the sidelines during this bull market rally?
For everything we've talked about, so many people are frightened about all the things that could go wrong, and it's a very hard thing to do, to read the newspapers and say, to hell with it, I'm going to put money in the stock market. It's a really hard thing to do. And so I think a lot of people have missed it. And this is the dynamic we see in retail markets. This is why you see retail investors always kind of jump in at the end of these runs, because finally, having been afraid all that time and sat on the sidelines. But the great Stan Druckenmiller told a great story about the end of the dot-com bubble, where he'd been sitting on the sidelines and watching all these young guys making a fortune. And he said, to hell with it. And he invested a lot of money, lost $1 billion of Soros money. And when they asked him about it years later, they said, what did you learn? And he said, nothing. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but he just couldn't help himself. So it happens to everybody. And I think that's the one thing that could cause this possible melt-up, is people capitulating.
Great parable, just showing people how these guys that are professionals and they do this every day for a living,
we're all humans.
They make the same mistakes. Yeah,
absolutely right.
And that's where we get into the whole trying to take emotion out of it as much as you can.
Yeah.
Because when you get emotional, that's usually when you make your mistakes.
So true, in markets and in life.
Yes, yes. What do you think of the Fed's grand experiment?
Well, it's exactly that. It's an experiment. So the results aren't in yet. We're kind of halfway through the lab test right now, and so far, they're probably getting the results that they thought they would get, or they hoped they would get. At least I don't think they probably had any idea what results they would get. But again, the experiment isn't done yet. We're still in the lab, and QT is going to really tell us how this experiment ends up. And look, common sense tells you cannot just print money and it all works out okay. And history will tell you the same thing. But for now, their grand experiment has worked. Is it working? I don't know, but it has been working.
Now, what's interesting to me too is, so emerging markets, especially what's going on with the trade war with China, they've been really depressed. And it sort of feels like if there's any major upside move right now, that sort of feels like where the move is. Would you agree with that?
I would, but I think you have to have an opinion on the dollar. And if you think the dollar is going to continue and get a lot stronger, then emerging markets are going to feel the pressure of that. But I think personally, I think in the longer term, the dollar is going lower. So for me, emerging markets offer a good opportunity right now. But you have to watch the dollar. Again, it's this, you have to pay attention, and the dollar is the one thing that is going to dictate how emerging markets go.
Yeah, and it felt very much like Europe was in a similar situation until we recently had with Italy, what's going on there with the budget negotiations, and the fact that their debt to GDP ratio, they took it over that 2% threshold, and that kind of, Europe felt like it was in the same spot and there could really be a rally, and that kind of feels like it's kind of put on the sidelines lately.
Yeah, because again, in Europe you've got this political divide again. I mean, it's happening on a country basis, but it's also happening in Europe as a whole, and Italy is the perfect example of that. You know, these guys are going against what the guys in Brussels want them to do, and inside Italy there's great divide on a national level. So everywhere you look, there's political turmoil, and as I said, that's never a good thing. Markets don't like it. We've kind of gotten used to it, and people have looked past it because we've been in this situation for a while and nothing bad's happened. But if Italy starts to matter, or if the midterms start to matter, then very quickly political risk will get repriced, and then suddenly you have to account for all the stuff going on, and you know, it's not a good situation to really kind of evaluate.
To your point, markets hate uncertainty, right?
They do, yeah.
And when they're uncertain, they sell off.
Sure.
And then lastly, I thought you made a really great analogy in your speech. You were talking about the natural ecosystem and the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone,
yeah,
and how that plays such an important part of the cycle. And you were comparing that to sort of the financial ecosystem and the removal of the gold standard.
Yeah.
Do you think we're headed back toward the gold standard eventually?
Well, as I said in my presentation, do I think it's imminent? No. Do I think it's inevitable? In some form or another, I think it is, because if you read history, we've been through this cycle so many times. And the point I was trying to make was that our only real experience has been in a purely fiat world with no gold anchor to the monetary system. So we don't have any frame of reference. But if you read history going back, you know, more than 50 years, that's all it is, you will see this happen time and time again. And when you look at the level of debt, which everyone's been talking about here at the conference, you look at the potential problems that we face, a gold standard of some sort is going to be a solution. But again, the point I was making is you don't choose to institute a gold standard. It's the result of a breakdown of the financial system, and then the gold standard comes back to re-anchor it, and I think that's what will happen.
Makes complete sense to me.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Thanks very much for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Scott.
Certainly. If you're enjoying these videos, don't forget to press that like button. Comment down below, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, please. And remember to click that bell to be sure you don't miss out on our newest updates. Stay tuned for more updates from our Vegas conference.